In the opulent halls of the Walker mansion, they thought they had everything under control until the day the maid they had discarded returned. But this time, she wasn't just a maid. She was a billionaire, and she had come back to make them regret every moment they had ever wronged her. Alina Matthews had never expected much from life. Born into poverty and raised in the cramped apartments of a rundown neighborhood, she learned early that the world wasn't kind to people like her. Yet, when she was offered a job as a maid for the Walker family, she thought maybe, just maybe, things could change. The Walkers were a wealthy, powerful family living in a sprawling mansion at the edge of the city, a world apart from her own. She was assigned to clean their mansion, serve their meals, and tend to their every need. The family barely noticed her, except for Adrian Walker, the eldest son. While his parents were distant and indifferent, Adrian seemed to take an unusual interest in her. He wasn't kind, not in the way she had hoped, but he often spoke to her with a cold politeness that felt more like a reminder of her place rather than an act of genuine care. The Walkers had it all: wealth, status, and influence. They believed that nothing could touch them. But what they didn't realize was that Alina, beneath the surface, was different. She was smart, driven, and determined to change her life. She spent her nights studying, determined to escape the cage that had been set for her by society's cruel standards. But then came the fateful day that shattered everything. Alina was framed for a crime she didn't commit, a theft she had never even considered. Adrian, who had always seemed indifferent to her, suddenly turned against her. His influence and power were enough to convince his family and the authorities that she was guilty. With no one to defend her, Alina was tossed out of the mansion, her name smeared, her future uncertain. The Walkers believed they had rid themselves of the problem. But they couldn't have been more wrong. The years passed in a blur for Alina. Once she had been a simple maid, scrubbing floors and cleaning windows, only to be discarded like a piece of trash by the very people who once employed her. Now she was a different woman. She had transformed, no longer the broken, disrespected servant who had been cast out into the streets. Instead, she was a force to be reckoned with, a billionaire in her own right. But how had she made it? No one knew the true story, and that was exactly how Alina wanted it. In the wake of her dismissal, she had done what everyone thought was impossible. She rebuilt her life. It wasn't just about the money, it was about survival. Every dollar she made, every success she achieved, was a testament to the strength she had found in herself. She started from scratch, taking small freelance jobs and consulting gigs, using every penny to invest in her future. She knew the rules of the game better than most. If you could play the game without ever revealing your hand, you could win. For years, Alina kept a low profile. She focused on building her wealth, but she never forgot what the Walkers had done to her. She couldn't. Every time she passed a mansion or saw the name Walker on a building, the anger resurfaced. It wasn't the money that had driven her, it was the thirst for justice, the desire to make them pay. She was determined to make them regret the day they had tossed her out with nothing. Her rise to power was slow but relentless. She didn't use flashy tactics or loud public displays of wealth. She used her intellect, her drive, and her ability to see opportunities others overlooked. By the time her name was known in the business world, the Walkers had long since moved on, their lives continuing as if nothing had happened. Adrian, now a successful businessman in his own right, had probably forgotten about her completely. But Alina never forgot. Every step she took, every new venture she entered was part of a larger plan. She had become a silent investor in several industries, amassing companies, assets, and real estate, quietly building an empire that stretched from tech startups to real estate development. Her name was whispered in the halls of power, but no one knew her true identity. They had no idea that Alina Matthews, the same woman they had tossed out, was the driving force behind some of the most successful ventures in the world. And then one day the opportunity arrived. Alina received a call from a lawyer she had never met. "Ms. Matthews, there's a proposal for you from the Walker family," the lawyer said, his voice calm but unsettling. "They've requested your presence at a meeting. It's urgent. They want to discuss a possible partnership." At first, Alina's instinct screamed for her to ignore it. Why would they want anything to do with her? But curiosity gnawed at her. The Walkers, Adrian in particular, had no idea who she had become. This wasn't just a business proposal. This was their mistake coming back to haunt them. The mystery of why they wanted her now, after all these years, stirred something dark inside her. The timing, too, was strange. Adrian had been on the cusp of making a major business deal with a company she had just acquired a controlling stake in. Alina's heart raced as she hung up the phone. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The Walkers might think they were still in control, but she had been playing the long game. Now it was time for them to find out just how wrong they were. Her lips curled into a small, knowing smile. This was no longer about revenge. It was about power, and the moment she would take it all from them. Alina's heart hammered in her chest as she stared at the invitation in her hands. The Walker family had reached out, but they had no idea what they were walking into. She had spent years meticulously planning, building her wealth, and creating a network of influence. Now it was time for the final act. She had risen from nothing, and she wouldn't let them forget what they had done to her. But as the meeting drew closer, an undercurrent of tension surged within her. Would this be the chance for redemption she had been waiting for, or would her anger cloud her judgment? Alina arrived at the Walker estate, the same mansion where her life had been torn apart years ago. The towering gates, the perfectly manicured lawns, and the towering pillars of wealth and status, they all seemed so familiar, yet so distant now. As she stepped out of the car, her thoughts raced. Was she truly prepared for this confrontation? It was no longer about surviving. It was about confronting the ghosts of her past. The moment she walked into the mansion, she was struck by how little had changed. The opulent surroundings felt suffocating, as if the air itself was steeped in the memories of the past. Adrian Walker, now in his early 40s, stood at the top of the grand staircase, watching her as she made her way inside. His face was a mask of polite interest, but his eyes betrayed something else, a flicker of recognition, perhaps even unease. He hadn't expected her to come back, not in this form, but there she was. Alina, Adrian's voice was cold, but there was a hint of surprise hidden beneath the surface. I didn't expect to see you here. Alina met his gaze with an icy calm. She had spent years planning this moment, but she couldn't help but feel a flicker of the old pain. She had once looked up at him, hoping for some sign of kindness, some acknowledgement of her humanity. But now, all she saw was a man who had played a part in ruining her life. His presence no longer had the power to intimidate her. You didn't expect me. Alina's voice was steady, measured, like a weapon carefully aimed. Funny, because I didn't expect you to ever remember me at all. Adrian motioned for her to sit in the drawing room, the same one where she had once served tea, where she had been humiliated by his family, where she had silently listened to them discuss their lavish lives as if she were invisible. Now, she was no longer invisible. Now they would listen. As they settled into their seats, the conversation began, but it wasn't about business. It was about the past. Adrian spoke in the detached tones of a man who believed he could control the narrative, as if he could rewrite history with mere words. He apologized, but it was a half-hearted gesture, meant to placate rather than heal. He mentioned the company he had built, his future plans, and then, almost as an afterthought, he brought up the mistake of firing her years ago. I'm sorry for what happened, Alina, he said, his tone finally softening. We were wrong. It was a decision made in haste. Alina's grip tightened on the armrest of her chair. She had been waiting for this moment, the apology, the recognition of what had been taken from her, but it didn't feel like closure. It felt like an attempt to brush everything under the rug. This wasn't the justice she had been waiting for. This wasn't enough. I don't need your apology. Alina's words cut through the air, sharp and unforgiving. You don't get to apologize for ruining my life, not after everything you took from me. The real question is, why are you really here? Adrian shifted uncomfortably. The polite mask he had worn earlier began to crack. He had expected her to be grateful, to be broken, to accept his apology. But Alina was no longer the girl who had been tossed aside. She was a force, a woman who had learned how to turn her pain into power. "You're not the same woman I remember," Adrian said, his voice tinged with a mix of admiration and disbelief. "No," Alina replied, her voice steady and unwavering. "I'm not the same woman, and you're going to regret that." The conversation shifted into business, but the tension between them was palpable. Alina's mind was already racing, calculating the next steps, the long-term play. She wasn't here for reconciliation. She was here to take what was rightfully hers, to show the Walkers that no amount of wealth, no amount of influence could ever protect them from the consequences of their actions. Adrian may have thought that this meeting would be a simple business negotiation, but for Alina, this was the beginning of something much more significant. The moment she would make the Walkers realize just how wrong they had been. The moment when they would understand that their wealth, their power, could never erase the damage they had done to her. She would take everything from them, not out of anger, but out of necessity. They would regret underestimating her, and in the end, they would know just how dangerous it was to mess with a woman who had nothing to lose. The tension in the room was palpable. Alina sat across from Adrian, her eyes locked on his with a calculated intensity that made him squirm despite his usual confidence. He had spent years building his empire, convinced that his money and influence could shield him from anything, especially the consequences of the cruelty his family had inflicted on her. But now, here she was, the same woman they had discarded, transformed into something he could no longer control. Adrian's hand hovered over his glass, but he didn't reach for it. His mind raced, piecing together the realization that the woman he once dismissed was now in a position to take everything he had worked for. His gaze flickered to her, but he quickly averted his eyes. He couldn't quite grasp the full extent of her transformation, but he knew one thing: this wasn't just a business negotiation. This was personal. "What do you want, Alina?" he finally asked, his voice betraying a slight edge of frustration. Alina's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. For a moment, she didn't respond. She simply let the silence stretch, letting it hang in the air, thick with unspoken words. She had waited so long for this moment, this confrontation. But it wasn't about the money anymore. It wasn't even about revenge, not in the way he thought. It was about the truth of who she had become, and the truth of who they were. "You know what I want," Alina said, her voice steady, calm, and colder than ever. "I want justice." Adrian's face hardened at the word. Justice. It was a word he'd never considered in relation to her, never thought she would ever have the right to claim. To him, she had been a victim, a casualty of the family's reputation and pride. But she wasn't a victim anymore. She was standing before him as the one person who had the power to break him. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Adrian," Alina continued, her tone unwavering. "I don't want your pity or your apologies. I'm here to take what was stolen from me. I'm here to take everything from you." For a brief moment, Adrian's composure faltered. His eyes flashed with something. Fear, perhaps, or a deep, gut-wrenching realization. He had spent so long running his life on his terms, believing that power and wealth were enough to keep everything in line. He never once thought that his actions could come back to haunt him, especially not in the form of someone he thought was beneath him. "You're making a mistake," Adrian said, his voice low, attempting to regain control. "You don't know what you're getting into. You think you can just waltz back into our lives and take everything from us? You're wrong." But Alina's gaze didn't falter. She had heard these words before, the same dismissive, patronizing tone. It was the same language they had used when they had tossed her out. But now, in this moment, it was clear. The tables had turned. She had everything they thought they had, and now she was going to make them feel the full weight of their cruelty. "I don't need your approval," she said softly, leaning forward slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper as if sharing a secret. "What you fail to understand, Adrian, is that I don't need you. I never did." The silence in the room grew deafening. Adrian's eyes widened as the realization hit him like a freight train. She wasn't here to beg for mercy or ask for a share of their fortune. She was here to prove that the power they had built their lives on meant nothing. She was here to take what was rightfully hers, what they had stolen from her. For the first time since the meeting began, Adrian felt a chill run through his spine. The air in the room seemed to grow colder, and the mansion's grandeur, once so impressive, suddenly felt oppressive. Alina had not just returned for closure, she had come to expose the fallacy of everything he stood for. Her words cut through the tension like a blade. You believed I was weak, that I was small. You believed you could throw me away and I'd never amount to anything. But look at me now, Adrian. Look at what you've made me. Look at what I've become. I'm not a maid anymore. I'm your nightmare. In that moment, Adrian saw it, truly saw it. He saw the strength in Alina, the fire that had been ignited in her when they wronged her. He saw the scars of her past, the relentless drive that had transformed her into the woman sitting before him, and it terrified him. It wasn't just the money, it wasn't just her success. It was the fact that she had taken everything they had tried to strip from her, her dignity, her future, and her worth, and turned it into something more powerful than he could ever understand. I've already taken everything, Alina said, her voice softening, almost wistful. But now I'm going to take you down, not because I need your money, but because you deserve to lose everything you have. For the first time in years, Adrian Walker felt vulnerable. The empire he had built, his legacy, suddenly felt fragile, like it could shatter with one wrong move. Alina wasn't just a woman from his past. She was the reckoning he had never seen coming. The realization hit him like a wave, and for the first time, he understood that the true cost of his actions had yet to be paid. The storm inside Alina had been building for years, and now it was finally breaking free. What she had come to realize in the moments of silence between her words was that Adrian's arrogance wasn't just the problem. It was the system that had created him. The Walkers believed they were untouchable because they had lived their lives in a bubble of privilege, immune to the consequences of their actions. They had made her a scapegoat, a convenient way to erase their mistakes without ever realizing the destruction they had wrought on her. But as Alina sat across from Adrian, she felt a deeper satisfaction than she'd ever expected. Adrian had finally shown his cards. His earlier confidence, the careful control he had exercised over the situation, was starting to slip. Alina could see it in his eyes. His once imposing demeanor had cracked, revealing the uncertainty that now gripped him. But there was still one thing that needed to happen. She needed to make him understand, on a deeper level, how far she had come and what was now at stake. I told you, Alina said, her voice unwavering. I'm not here for an apology. I'm not here for your empty words. I'm here because you need to understand the weight of what you did. Adrian opened his mouth as if to protest, but no words came out. His silence was more powerful than any defense he could have offered. He was finally listening, finally beginning to grasp the enormity of what he had done. He had thought he could just push Alina out of his life, bury her beneath the layers of wealth and influence. But now she was back, and she had come to take everything. I've been thinking about how to make this moment impactful, Alina continued, her tone shifting slightly, becoming more deliberate. But I realize something. You don't need to lose your wealth or your name. What's worse for you, Adrian, is that I'm going to take your reputation. I'm going to strip away your credibility, and when that's gone, you'll be left with nothing. The words hung in the air like an echo. Adrian's expression shifted from surprise to disbelief to a tense anger, the kind of anger that only comes from realizing that someone has just outsmarted you. But Alina wasn't done. She reached into her bag and placed a folder on the table between them. The thick papers inside seemed to weigh more than just paper. Each page was evidence, proof of the deceit, the manipulation, and the underhanded business practices the Walker family had used to secure their wealth. The documents were damning. Alina had spent years compiling them, using her vast network of sources, legal professionals, and business insiders to build a case so airtight that even the Walkers' wealth couldn't protect them. Adrian's face paled as he reached for the folder, his fingers trembling as they flipped through the pages. Each one detailed illegal dealings, shady transactions, and financial maneuvers designed to hide the true cost of their empire. The money they had stolen from the unsuspecting, The shady business deals hidden in offshore accounts, the manipulation of markets and labor, their entire fortune was built on lies. "This is what you don't understand," Alina said softly, watching his reaction. "You're not just losing your fortune, you're losing your face, your name. Everything you built will be destroyed. Because when the truth comes out, when people see what you really are, no one will ever trust you again." The full weight of her words settled in. The room felt colder, the silence heavier. Adrian's mouth went dry, and for the first time in years, he felt utterly powerless. This wasn't just a business transaction. This was personal. This was everything he had ever feared, being exposed for the fraud he truly was. "I could go to the authorities," Alina continued, her voice cutting through the thick tension. "But why bother with that? I have something more powerful. A business empire built on lies, Adrian, is something the world can't ignore. People will walk away, your investors, your partners, your clients. They'll abandon you the moment they see what you really are." It was at that moment that the full realization hit him. Adrian had spent years climbing to the top, thinking he was invincible, thinking his wealth would protect him from the consequences of his actions. But now, everything he had built, everything he had worked for, was on the verge of unraveling before his eyes. The only thing holding it together was a fragile web of lies, and Alina was prepared to burn it all to the ground. "I'm giving you a choice," Alina said, her voice low but unyielding. "You can keep your empire, but you will never be the same. The world will know who you truly are, or you can let it all fall apart, and I'll make sure you pay for every person you've wronged." Adrian's mind raced, his thoughts scrambling to find a solution, a way to fix the mess that Alina had laid out before him. But no matter how hard he tried, no way forward presented itself. He was trapped. She had outplayed him. She had broken him, not with her money, not with her power, but with the truth. In that moment, the facade of invincibility that Adrian had so carefully crafted over the years finally shattered. He wasn't the one in control anymore. Alina had turned the tables completely, and there was no escape from the storm she had unleashed. Alina stood, slowly gathering her things, her eyes never leaving his. "This is just the beginning, Adrian," she said quietly. "You'll regret ever thinking you could destroy me." And with that, she walked out of the room, leaving behind a man who had just come face to face with his worst fear, the undeniable truth that power could be bought, but it could also be taken away, just as easily as a woman once cast out. The moment Alina walked out of the Walker mansion, the door closing behind her with a finality that seemed to echo in the air, the world felt like it was spinning. She had done it. She had finally delivered the blow that would bring Adrian to his knees. But as she walked away, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the years, the pain, the struggle, all of it crashing down on her in waves. This wasn't just about revenge. It had never been just about revenge. This was her transformation, her rebirth. For years, she had dreamed of this moment, had planned every step meticulously, but now that it had arrived, she felt the gravity of what it meant. Adrian Walker, once the man who had held power over her, was now the one trapped in the consequences of his actions. The satisfaction of watching him crumble was undeniable, but a part of her felt something deeper, something that went beyond just the relief of justice. As she entered the sleek black car waiting outside, Alina leaned back against the seat, closing her eyes for a moment. The adrenaline from the confrontation had not yet worn off, but beneath it, something quieter, more introspective began to take root. Was she the same person she had been when she had entered the mansion? In that moment, she realized the answer was no. She wasn't the same woman anymore. The transformation that had begun the day she was cast out had culminated in this moment of clarity. It wasn't just the wealth, the power, or even the revenge that had made her unrecognizable. It was the realization that she had taken control of her own destiny, that she had become something greater than the world had ever allowed her to be. She was no longer the victim. She was the architect of her own future. Inside the car, her mind raced with the next steps. Adrian's empire was crumbling, but she wasn't done yet. There were still moves to make, people to influence, deals to secure. But as she looked out the window at the city, a new sense of purpose began to settle within her. The city that once felt so distant, so impossible, now felt like her domain. The future was hers for the taking. As the car made its way to her penthouse, Alina couldn't shake the thought that this victory, as sweet as it was, came with its own set of consequences. Adrian Walker might have been exposed, but she knew the world wouldn't forget who had brought him down. She would forever be the woman who had come from nothing to destroy the empire of one of the world's most powerful families. But she also knew this. She wasn't done. Not yet. Not ever. Alina had not only dismantled a legacy, she had started to build one of her own. The Walker family had taken everything from her once. Now she would take everything from them. But this time, it wouldn't be with bitterness or anger. It would be with quiet, unrelenting power. The truth was, Alina didn't need Adrian's empire to feel complete. She had built her own, piece by piece, brick by brick, but the world, the business world, would soon come to know that she wasn't just a survivor. She was a conqueror, and no one would ever be able to take that away from her again. As she entered her penthouse and looked out over the city skyline, a soft smile touched her lips. This was just the beginning. The world had underestimated her once. They wouldn't make that mistake again. Alina Matthews had already won, but the real victory? It was still to come. Alina stood at the window of her penthouse, looking out over the city that had once been an insurmountable obstacle, a place where she had been overlooked, dismissed, and ultimately discarded. Now it was her kingdom. The skyscrapers gleamed in the distance, a visual representation of everything she had built: the empire, the power, and most importantly, the freedom. The weight of everything she had endured, the sleepless nights, the endless struggles, and the ceaseless drive to prove herself began to lift from her shoulders. In that moment, as the evening sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Alina felt an overwhelming sense of release. The years of pain and rage that had fueled her relentless pursuit of success and justice were finally coming to an end. She had done it. The Walkers, once towering figures in her life, were nothing more than a distant memory. Adrian's empire, the very thing that had driven her to the brink, was now in ruins, and with it, so were the chains that had once bound her. She had not only won, she had become the person she had always dreamed of being, the person she had fought so hard to become. But even as Alina stood there, her triumph felt different from what she had imagined. The fire that had once burned so fiercely within her now simmered with something else, a quiet satisfaction. She had taken everything from the Walkers, but in doing so, she had reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her future. The battle was over. The war had been won. And as the city stretched out before her, Alina realized something she had never truly understood until now. Victory wasn't about destroying the enemy. It was about becoming the person you were always meant to be. The rest was just a consequence of that transformation.